So, Death Stranding was released on November 8th, 2019, to critical and commercial confusion. It was a hugely anticipated title by the creator of the Metal Gear Solid series, Hideo Kojima, after his public falling out with Konami. It was a game promised to be unlike anything people had played before, transcending genres, and it kinda did, and people hated it. Well, not exactly, there's actually a lot of love for this game, but I've noticed that the people that actually do like it have a really hard time explaining why. It's a mailman simulator. The main gameplay is walking over rigid terrains with packages. Any gameplay besides that feels underdeveloped and unsatisfying. Its story has some really interesting themes and surprising twists hidden under monotonous delivery, pretentious metaphors, and mountains of lectures. None of this sounds good, but when you mix it all together, you get a package that just works somehow. I have played this shit for 150 hours and I also can't explain why I love it, but I do. Up to this point in my life, it was the most divisive video game release I had ever seen, which made it that much more surprising when a few months later The Last of Us 2 easily stole that title away. The Last of Us Part 2 came out June 19th of 2020 to a critical and commercial shitstorm. The release of this game was crazy, okay? Gamers were pissed, arguments were started, people yelled names at each other, feelings were hurt. Okay, it wasn't that crazy, but people were talking. Of course, gamers have never been a perfect breed, but this was the highest concentration of irrationalness I had ever seen directed at one specific game. One game that everyone was so excited for beforehand. Something off topic I found really funny was how similar the controversy around this and The Last Jedi was. Both are sequels, both have last in the title, both of them killed off the grumpy old guy that everyone likes, and both of them have big flaws that weren't criticism, but actual criticism of these two get drowned out in a sea of not very smart people, to put it nicely. And with this game, I think it was the fact that it was released smack in the midst of the pandemic that contributed to this craziness. With everyone in quarantine, people really didn't have anything better to do than go online and bitch about a video game. Look, I'm different. Speaking of which, hi, I'm Mad Static, and The Last of Us Part 2 is, well, for one, beautiful. I don't just mean that as fancy graphics, because it is a technical marvel, with in-depth animations, world design, and fidelity, but also an artistic benchmark, with the tiniest but most impactful details in lighting, scene shots, facial animations, acting, sound effects. I've just never seen a video game with this type of budget put so much effort in being sad and disgusting, and it's great for that. The Last of Us 2's gameplay is also a substantial step up from the previous. It feels more in line with a tactical stealth survival game rather than the cinematic third-person PlayStation exclusive type game that the first game inspired. It is still one of these games, and it does still have some of those unideal markings, but when you're invested in the survival and the story and in the flow of combat, it's so tense, hectic, and satisfying, and I really don't think the game gets enough credit for that. And now let me stop being around the bush and get to the point. This video is gonna almost exclusively be about the story, because that's what all the controversy and debate is over, and where I was really conflicted for a while. This story could be like 10 times worse, like the most abhorrent shit I had ever seen, and the quality of the gameplay and graphics alone would still have me considering this some good gaming. As for the story, I'ma be straight up. From this very line, right here, that I am now saying, I had to erase about 5 pages of the script. 5 pages I thought were pretty good, but I couldn't use anymore because my stupid ass opinion decided to change. It's been doing that ever since I first beat the game. Back then I thought while it was good on its own, it lacked something that made the first game's story truly special. And without it would fade away from thought as a pretty standard cycle of revenge story, but it obviously didn't do that. And as time passed, I started looking at the story more positively, while still standing on the problems I thought it had. A lot of what I was going to say about those problems still technically holds up, but my perspective on the story overall has shifted again, and it makes a lot of those points that I had just not as important to the experience anymore, and not worth the multiple paragraphs I had written about them. I started writing this while going back through the entire story for footage and affirmation on what I had thought, with the idea that The Last of Us Part 2 had a great story with some big problems that I wanted to reel in on with this video. But I was wrong. After my most recent playthrough, I think The Last of Us 2 has a fantastic story, with these big problems feeling more like blemishes in the face of what the story's strengths and accomplishments are. A flawed but rich devotion to misery with some of the best storytelling video games have to offer. It's still not as good as the first game though. The first Last of Us is one of the most influential games ever. Visually, it is beautiful, cinematic, and holds up extremely well. Even better now that we have a drop-dead gorgeous remake that we didn't need at all. I think the gameplay gets more flack than it deserves. It is not half bad. I even pop it in every so often to play and suck ass at the factions mode. It's a pretty fun game. But the main draw is the exquisite story it tells. A story that, maybe getting milked a little bit too much over 10 years, but still exquisite, and one of the best the medium has to Oh my god, this game is 10 years old. In this story, we follow a man named Joel, who loses his daughter at the start of the apocalypse, and 20 years into it is a broken, grumpy piece of shit. This is until he's tasked with watching Ellie, a rambunctious, aggressively curious teenager who is somehow immune to becoming a zombie. Together, they travel across a deteriorated United States to get Ellie to someone who can reverse engineer a cure. Honestly, none of this sounds very remarkable on paper. The concept for the zombies here is pretty unique, but it didn't really matter since this was well into that zombie saturation era of the 2010s. And even besides that, a game with a very similar story and concept released just a year before this one. What really made this game stand out amongst the rest was that cinematic approach it took, mixed in with its phenomenal character writing. Every major character you meet in this story is a bittersweet encapsulation of the game's themes, those being love and connecting with others, the idea of hope all around, and generally, finding someone or something to live for in this fucked up world, and no one represents these ideas better than our two leads. I first played this game when I was young, dumb, and very easy to scare, so I was on and off of this game for a while, until I eventually reached that one sniper scene where I could really tell just how much the chemistry between these two had grown, and from there I was glued until the credits. Watching these two relatable, flawed personalities clash against each other and then slowly grow to live for each other was just so beautiful, man. So much so that in time you grow to do the same. Whatever reason you started playing this game for, the care and investment you hold in these two will eventually become the driving force. That's what made the first game so special, to me at least. But the second game's a bit different though. It doesn't really have that instantly infectious hook that everyone can identify with and learn to love. Actually, it's the loss of that hook, that previous care and investment, that makes everyone collectively lose their shit and powers this game's plot. It results in a story that it's a little bit harder to get to the core of. This game starts a few years after the events of the first, where Joel and Ellie are leading peaceful lives in Jackson that are rudely interrupted when this girl named Abby shows up with her pals and beats Joel to death. This is what sets everything off, and from there the majority of the story takes place across 3 days in the war-torn ruins of Seattle. We first follow Ailey's 3 days as she tracks down Abby and her friends, exacts some good old-fashioned revenge, and also kinda sorta looks for Tommy, who also came here for some revenge. The revenging starts to take its toll on her, however, as she slowly but surely loses herself in her efforts. After that, the clock rewinds as we follow Abby's 3 days as she helps her ex and these two kids that saved her life get out of the city, and overall tries to move on from the revenge quest that fueled her life for the past few years. Again, overall, pretty good setup. Some problems here and there, but overall pretty good. And let's start with the single most overlooked part of this game, the visuals. Now I know what I said I was gonna do and I know what you're thinking, and it's that way of thinking that helps skip over what I think really matters. Whenever I heard most people talk about the visuals, they dedicate like maybe 30 seconds to talking about it, but I want to give it the 40 seconds it truly deserves. People tend to brush it over like, yeah, it's another visual Naughty Dog masterpiece pushing the limits of the hardware and gaming in general, but that story though! Bro! This is the story. It's not just a high-performing, high-fidelity powerhouse. Call of Duty is just a high-performing, high-fidelity powerhouse. This is fucking cinema, okay? It's another means of the story communicating its themes, its characters, and its world, and it does so magnificently. Again, this game puts so much effort in the misery of this world. The atmosphere is never so disheartening or depressing that it isn't fun to be in, but it is dire and intense, while also hollow and kind of meaningless. It's painted in a lot of gray, and that gray is alive and all-consuming. Well, the palette changes to represent a lot of different situations and emotions, but it's most common with reminiscent lush flashbacks looked back on with nostalgia, or the chaotic, frantic climaxes where something fucked up happens. Seattle probably isn't the most unique environment for a game, especially with the number of games like GTA out there, but they put a lot of detail into the overgrown streets, individual abandoned shops and businesses. Everywhere tells a mini story, and by the end of it all, the entire city feels connected and clear. My favorite environment is definitely the movie theater. The bright lights that create dark shadows cast an inauthentic showmanship. It's surreal and hard to explain, but it's really cool. Speaking of theater though, oh my god, the acting in this game? Pretty good. So good in fact that it actively carries some of the lesser parts of the game. There's a lot of hidden context and communication that's never said outright and that you're only gonna figure out by studying characters' facial animations and mannerisms and tones of voice. It's very subtle, but if this stuff was said outright, it wouldn't be nearly as convincing or effective. The same goes for shots and scene positioning too. It's all finding the best way to portray these characters and their state of mind. Even beyond that though, the acting honestly improves how I feel about a lot of these characters. People who aren't relevant enough to leave any sort of impression still actually manage to because these actors are acting their asses off. Ooh, that was a tongue twister. Relationships that aren't really fleshed out enough are held together by the chemistry in these performances and fill in a lot of the gaps left open by the plot. Genuinely, my favorite part of revisiting this game was hyper-fixating on these actors and seeing how they shined. Before I move on to writing as a whole though, I gotta talk about the game's approach to violence. I have long since been desensitized to blood and gore and all that and more in video games, late nights at 3. But I do appreciate Part 2's approach to it. It's not the most grotesque or over-the-top depiction of violence, especially when compared to that year's Doom Eternal. Like, that shit is crazy. But I think it's the attention to the smaller details here that really complement the game's overall tone. They've put a lot of thought into how what you do specifically affects the enemy's body. It feels really gross if you pay attention to it. Even something as simple and essential as a headshot can make your skin crawl when you see what it's actually done up close. It strikes this balance between making the player curious and sympathetic. It's not glorified or the most brutal game ever, but when you get that kill sometimes you're like, damn. Sucks to be you. Okay then, to wrap up the visual storytelling and prowess, it does as good of a job portraying the themes and messages of this story as the actual narrator does, so show us some more respect. You guys called it the king of visuals before, take it a step up. The super king of visuals. The overall theme of this game is focused on the cycle of hatred and violence, as a lot of people will blatantly pull it revenge bad. It's a common theme and message, but a classic. For me, it's never really about how unique a message is, but on how it's approached and delivered, and I think this game puts a lot of effort into telling a meaningful story with it. The setup itself isn't what strikes me, but it's the lengths of intimacy with these two characters and their cycles of hate that really make this very long journey worth it. On my revisit to Ellie's section, I was surprised to see just how early the nastier parts of her character started emerging. From the very start of her revenge mission, she's working off this half-assed logic of hopping into Seattle and just, I don't know, start asking questions, gather information, kill anyone with a problem with it. Doing all of this will eventually lead to Abby, and Tommy, but mostly Abby. She's clearly got a lot going on mentally and emotionally, and that's where Dina comes in. Dina is the character I think I came around the most to during this revisit. Before, I felt like she was kinda underdeveloped, or at least not as nuanced as the rest of the cast. It was like she was there to be Ellie's emotional backbone and give her someone that she could and does eventually lose. But going back through it, I noticed how much of that unwavering support was actually wrapped in hesitation. The whole time she's trying her best to slowly and subtly pull Ellie back into reason, with a lot of her basic conversation and objective-focused questions having very self-reflective undertones. Do you feel any differently about the situation? Are you sure you still want to do this, now that we know this? Overall, can we please just find Tommy and go home? It doesn't really work, but she's still trying to be there for her, and it's probably the best way to rationalize with Ellie, who already knows this is a terrible idea. When Ellie comes up with a perfect, pristine plan, like breaking into a heavily militia-occupied hospital to find one specific person, it doesn't take a lot of asking on the how part of the plan to get Ellie defensive, because she already knows this is stupid. Ellie constantly looks conflicted in this game, like she's fighting against her better judgment and common sense just to move forward, and it's taking her to places she's not really prepared for. Until she is. I really like this part during day 2 when she runs into Jesse, because you can see all of that angst and anger turn into regret and confusion. She realizes that she's managed to drag another one of the people she cares about into this stupid ass revenge quest, a revenge quest that they don't even know the full story behind. None of this is ever said or referenced directly, but it's only communicated through Ashley Johnson's performance and a bunch of very talented animators. Despite everything telling her to stop what she's doing, oh yeah, Tommy! Tommy's still here, we gotta go get Tommy out. He's serving as a very convenient excuse for Ellie to keep moving forward, but then we reach that scene in the mall where Tommy is pretty much confirmed to be somewhere other than the aquarium. There's not a lot of time to sit and choose, and in the heat of the moment, Ellie just flat out drops the idea that she's here for Tommy. She's like, I'm gonna get me that there revenge, whether Tommy's there or you're with me or whatever. It's such a blunt reversal that even Jesse is just left dumbfounded, like what the fuck? There's just so many other layers and details to Ellie's downfall, it's just amazing. Well, actually it sucks that the awesome kid from the last game grew up into a piece of shit, but it's captivating through and through, and so is Abby's part. I don't view the point of Abby's story as just finding a way to sympathize with the enemy. It's not just about taking the bad guy and showing us that they have their own qualities and flaws and feelings and collection hobby, where with Ellie we watch the breakdown of a character, with Abby we watch the rebuilding of one. We were just shown what this cycle of hatred can do to a person, and Abby has been living with it for years. It controlled and shaped her life from the moment she saw her dad dead to the moment she got revenge on Jiggy with a Joel. And with that release, she realizes what a waste of time in her person revenging has actually been. She's still the same person, but she's been so consumed by this goal for so long that she's lost touch with what she actually cares about. She cares about her coin collection. She cares about Owen. Like, she really cares about Owen. And she cares about fighting to actually do something worthwhile. She was a Firefly, working to restore humanity to the way it was. Like, her dad had his own ugly side, but he helped zebras. She could have also been helping zebras. And that's what Abby's story is all about. Zebras. I mean, fighting for someone or something actually worthwhile. Intentionally paralleling the first game and the old guy from there. She ends up being saved by these two kids, Yar and Lev, outcast of the cult society that her militia has been locked in a hate-fueled war with. As such, she naturally hates this group, but something is fueling a change of heart here. In the grand scheme of things, their lives are meaningless, but it's through helping and connecting with these two kids that just want to be at peace that she starts to feel whole again. Like she is actually starting to reconnect with what's important. But it's too late. If you've grown to actually care about Abby, then day 3 is a descent into a nightmare. Obviously, she goes galloping through a burning battlefield, but the dramatic irony that sets in here is haunting. Abby realizing that everyone she cares about has been hunted down by the people they let live a few months ago. It's almost enough to make all that soul-searching and real redemption she just went through completely voided as she goes to the theater and that climactic confrontation takes place. That's some good-ass gaming and story. Now, while my overall view of the story has changed, I think a lot of the points I was originally gonna make still stand. That's to say, the story has flaws. Enough flaws to fuel an entire other video, and pacing is not one of them. I feel like this is one of the big problems that even people who like the game pointed out as not great. And I'll admit this right now, day 1 for both Ellie and Abby is slow as hell. Specifically Abby's, as most of it sees me hanging out with people I don't care about and won't grow to. I don't really have a problem with the rest of the pacing though. Most people reasonably judge it as one linear story, and from that viewpoint, yeah, it's a bit messy and constantly has low points of interest, but I look at it separated into 4 parts. You got the tutorial opening premise section in Jackson, then you've got 2 separate storylines that start off slow but smoothly ramp up in intensity, and then cut off right at the climax. You gotta play through both in order to unlock the finale and see it all boil over, and then get the ending epilogue. I think the structure is kinda cool when you frame it like that, but I can't blame anyone for still feeling it's messy there. One flaw I won't defend, however, is a lot of the character writing, and it's kinda hard to break down why it doesn't work here. The characters here feel as if they serve the story's themes instead of representing them like they did in the last game, and that's not necessarily an issue by itself. Different stories approach characters and settings and events in the way that best suits that specific story, and this is a much different story from the first one. But here's the thing. This game is about these 2 characters and their journey of violence and whatnot, their hatred, their losses, and a big part of that journey is the people in their lives, the people they love and lose and affect. But I don't really care about most of the cast of us too, and I feel like a lot of them are missing the mark for different reasons. You got the most egregious examples in Jesse and Manny. These are supposed to be our protagonist's best friends, who they end up losing directly as a result of their revenge missions, but I don't know these 2 as people or fleshed out characters. The entire time we know them, they're the cool bros who are always down to help their friends and then just get fucking shot and die out of nowhere. There was nothing to them. Then you got Tommy and Isaac. These are the 2 older mentor-like characters who are much more accustomed to the messed up roads that AB and Easter are going down. During their vengeancing, they're pretty in sync with their mentors, but as they move away from their dark tendencies, those relationships become estranged. Thematically, they're very rich and interesting characters. Realistically though, they barely matter. Isaac is introduced in one scene and then dies in the second one. You can find more info on him in the game's many collectibles and NPC conversations. Tommy is in more of the game, but not really enough to make his drastic character arc satisfying. He just feels kinda there. Mel and Owen are fleshed out characters with plenty of time within their story, but the game doesn't manage to build any bias between us and them. I can sympathize with their situation, I can understand why Abby cares about them, but overall I'm just not interested in these 2. Almost everyone's missing something, whether that be nuance, time, or careability. I don't think that's a word, but it should be. When these characters meet their fate, it doesn't leave the intended impact. Again, I'm just like, damn, sucks for their loved ones, which might be the point, but it's not a very strong one to build an entire character around. Ultimately though, the reason I can look past all of this is because it feels more like missed potential than anything else. Those characters, while not as strongly written as they could be, still serve their purpose in the story, while the most important ones are engaging and likable. I think Dina is a good example of what the others should have been. She's given proper time, depth, and a reason to like her. She's just a likable person past the themes and her role in the story. Same goes for Lev, though he's got that good kid mad situation bias like Ellie had in the last game. And you know, Joel's doing a really good job in his new dead dad position, but Elith and Abbott are obviously the focal point here. And by the time we reach the theater fight, I'm able to look at these two from two different lights. There's the morning protagonist, who I've grown to love through my multitude of hours playing as them, and the psychopathic antagonist with a bunch of violent emotions they don't know how to handle. Understanding and sympathizing with characters is one thing, but any story that's able to make me actively like and dislike these two at the same time is doing something superbly. Now, I'm still a little bit conflicted on some things, like the ending. I understand why they skipped 2 years ahead, but I just think it would have been much more effective directly following the events of Seattle. Overall, though, I still love the hollow, sort of meaningless voyage this ending creates. I also do think Joel's death scene could have been better paced, focusing more on building up dread instead of hitting us with shock. But this death still serves its purpose, and the scene definitely doesn't ruin the game. Like, geez Louise, look at this guy. What an idiot! Again, there's a lot of flaws with this story, enough that I could probably make another much longer video going over, but frankly, they just aren't important to my experience anymore. It's weird, because I look back and see that most of the positives and negatives I took away from my first playthrough still stand, but after my second run I feel a completely different way about them. I was completely wrong. I thought it was pretty good, when in reality, it was really good! This game's story runs the opposite to the original, where The Last of Us 1 was about what's worth fighting for. This game is about what isn't worth fighting for. Hatred. It's a piece of shit, alright? It plays off the inevitable pain of someone losing its opposite, and through Ellie and Abby, we get a very intimate look at both ends of the cycle. It consumes their entire person, offers the most underwhelming payoff, and then comes back to kick them in the ass. At best, they just lose the people they care about, left behind in their own hatred. At worst, they drag their family and friends down with them, so they either die or become another cog in the cycle of revengeance. If you're gonna be a morally screwed asshole, you may as well be one for something that's really worth it for you. And I think The Last of Us Part 2 goes to some incredible lengths, showing us that pure frustration and anger isn't it. I'm very glad I revisited this game. Next time I'll probably just do it in tandem with revisiting the first one. And if you're someone like me, who's kind of in the middle or on the fence about the whole thing, if you've got the time, and which I mean a lot of time, it's at least 25 hours, giving the game another try might damn well be worth it.